you're competing with the algorithm at this point.
Yeah.
It's an interest based algorithm, so
Yeah.
it's going to give you what it thinks that you're interested in. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're on social media and you click on one thing out of curiosity, now the algorithm's like, oh, they like this, and it'll start giving
Yeah.
you more and more of that, and you're like, how do I get rid of it? And it's now you're getting bombarded with it, versus actually going to a store, or, like a record
Yeah.
store or whatever, and going through and being like, oh, I like this. This is what I want,
Yeah.
and it has value to you, and you cherish it. You're getting bombarded and confused. And at a certain point, people are like, I don't even know what I like anymore.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, Jampo Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. Today, we have a very amazing guest, Kean Levreault, with such an amazing last name, by the way, an innovative film director and the CEO of Spillsheet Media. Kian is known for his commitment to sustainable filmmaking and for challenging societal norms through cinema. We're thrilled to have him share his insights on how rapid changes in our world are influencing the film industry, the importance of ethical storytelling, and what the future holds for filmmakers, striving to make a positive impact on both society and environment. Kian, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And by the way, I have this segment where instead of just going on in the in-depth questions, I wanna ask who you are. I want to know who Kian is, what's your expertise, what your experiences are, and what keeps you busy these days.
Yeah, my name's Kean. I am a filmmaker, artist, musician, skateboarder, human being, just experiencing life on this planet, for the short amount of time that I have. So just trying to experience as much as I can and do good in the world.
That's amazing. And by the way, how did you get into filmmaking? Because not everyone when they're kids want to be a filmmaker.
Um,
Such an interesting field, by the way.
yeah, so it was sort of by accident. I mean, like I said, I grew up skateboarding, and we used to film ourselves skateboarding and make little sponsor me videos and things like that. But I went to school for music, and when I was in college, I was stopped in the hallway by a film student who was working on his thesis project and asked if I wanted to audition for his thesis film, which I did, and I got the role. And it was several months of shooting. So I got to experience firsthand what a film set felt like, and you know what the whole process was. And then from that, I met the cinematographer and some of the other crew members on that film, and they were working on their films, and I started doing soundtrack work for their films, for their thesis films, um, and then that just got me moving along with doing soundtrack work. And I graduated. I went to recording school and learned how to record and do audio engineering, but just kept doing music for films. Small things, but and then after a while, I started making my own films because I understood how they were put together.
When you started your own films, making your short films, did you fall in love with it?
Yeah, just the process of making films is always an adventure. Like you put yourself in situations that you might have not expected to find yourself in. You meet people that you didn't expect to meet. Um, really, for me, the process is the funnest part. Once the film's done, I mean, I'm happy to have the finished product, but it's really the creating the film that I love the most.
That's awesome. And by the way, I saw on your social media that you have this new robot arm where I think it's a motion camera. And as you said earlier in the video when it's not recorded, that it's easier to travel with. And I guess comes with that is, it's very different from when you were a filmmaker back then than to now.
Yeah, the motion control robot that I've been using, it's owned by Rift Moco. There's a friend of mine in Boston owns it, and I'm the technician for it. Um, and it's in the same family as say the Bolt or other motion control cameras like that, but it's much smaller and lighter, and you can actually travel with it on an airplane, which I've been doing quite a bit. I've been flying all over the country. Um, it's super easy to set up, and it speeds up productions quite a bit. So it's a new change of technology in the film industry. Whereas some of the larger motion control robots require trucks to move them. You need a few people to set them up. Even the smaller ones are still very large. Can't necessarily fit through doorways and things like that. So this one's a newer development, and it's making things move a lot quicker on set, which is pretty nice. Things are getting a little easier.
That's amazing. Do you think that the fact that we have these kinds of tools now makes it easier for new filmmakers entering the industry?
I do. I mean, that's something that's been going on for a while now with the, implementation of digital cameras, DSLRs, and now more advanced digital cameras. People have better access to cameras and filmmaking, and now with cell phones too. I mean, you can shoot an entire film on your phone, and people are doing that. Uh, one of the first major releases was Tangerine. It was shot all on iPhones, and it was gorgeous. It was a great story, but people can do that now very easily. But yeah, the motion control thing, it's still quite expensive to buy, so it's not like anybody can just drop the money that it takes to get one of these things. But it's much cheaper to rent than the larger ones. So yes, it's allowing a lot of people to get into higher production uh, higher productions at a lower cost.
That's fantastic. And by the way, I saw that you're releasing new film projects quite often. How long does your creative process and the fact that you have to film all this, how long does that usually take from start to finish?
It really depends on the project.
Yeah.
I mean, I make I make a lot of costumes in my spare time. I like the process of coming up with characters, masks, things like that. Um, so sometimes I'll just take the costume, put my friend in it, and film some stuff in a bedroom and shoot it in one day, edit it in a day, and it's done. That's a very short, quick turnaround. Um, Other films are much more involved. They require writing a script. It depends on what the set is. If there's multiple locations, that can take a while. The feature film that I just finished, the We Should game, uh, that that one's sort of complicated. That technically took 15 years, but the only reason it took so long is because I shot some stuff in 2003, and the footage sat idle for 15 years. And then my friend had the footage, and he sent me the footage, and then I started writing a script based on that footage from 2003. So technically I wasn't working on it for 15 years straight. It just sat there doing nothing. But that one did. Once I started writing the script, shooting, casting, getting actors, sets, location, everything. It did take about 4 years altogether to finish it, but it's a feature film, so
That's a very long time. I thought you filmed it for 15 years straight.
no, that
But
would that would be insane. But I mean, people have done things like that. Boy's Life, Linkletter did that for 20
yeah.
years. So
Oh man.
thing that does happen.
When your friends sent you the footage, was there a lot of nostalgia with that?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously I'm much older now, and I was I was the person in the footage, so I was watching myself behave in a way that I don't behave anymore, and I'm much younger, and there was a lot of nostalgia. A lot of people who I'm still friends with, but we were different people back then. So, and I was also living in New York, so that's where all the footage was taking place.
And also, I assume you have a book of ideas just laying around, all of the ideas that you have. What's your process on choosing which idea you will make into life?
Um, you just whichever one feels right. It's really just intuition. Because you don't want to spend years, months, whatever, however long on an idea that you're not 100% on. Um, so if the idea sticks and you keep thinking about it and you can't stop thinking about it, and days, weeks go by and you're still just as excited about that idea as you were the first time you thought of it, then that's probably the one you should be working on.
Do you think making you basically fell in love with that idea makes you want to work harder on it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you gotta love what you do. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it? I mean, if all you're doing is for fame or profit, then you're gonna have a pretty unfulfilling life.
That's amazing. So basically, it is your job and as well as your passion.
Yes, yes, for sure.
That's amazing. And by the way, how would you describe your cinematic style and what influences have, made that your style?
Um, I lean more towards surrealism, satire. I really like satire. I like when there is a target um, of ridicule or you know uh, uh, an issue that needs addressing to raise questions about, so that people can actually have a discussion. In terms of style, though, yeah, I do like surrealism. I like when things don't follow traditional rules. When reality sort of breaks a little bit, I think it's very interesting. Yeah, some of the influences. I mean, right now, Yorgos Lanthimos is a big influence. And some of the Greek stuff that's coming out right now. I like things that are subversive. So anybody who's sort of using, you know, approaching it from more of a sort of punk rock aesthetic, I guess, trying different things, breaking rules. I'm in full support of that.
That's amazing. And by the way, I saw that there's a lot of these new cameras that basically, these tiny cameras that films like the best cameras 20 years beforehand. Did you see that it's much easier for anyone to just go to a location right now and film something, besides of doing it a few years back?
Yeah, I mean, the level of entry keeps lowering, and anybody
Yeah,
who has an idea can go film it. I mean, we see it now with social media. People are creating content constantly. Um, so in a way, it's good.
yeah.
It can potentially push. Can you hear that? My phone's ringing. Do you want me to?
I know I don't hear it
Okay,
at all.
good. So yeah, it's tough because quality is starting to go down to a certain degree, because now anybody can create something immediately.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas before, you would have to spend a lot of time learning the craft, getting access to the equipment, and most people would not give you access to the equipment until you sort of proved that you understood how
yeah,
the workflow was and how storytelling operated, how to work with
yeah,
actors. Now anybody can do it, and it's everybody's doing it. So
yeah.
so the quality is a little low and oversaturated. Um,
Do, do you think it's ruining the industry in some sort of regard?
yeah, I mean, if you look at streaming channels, how long sometimes take you to find something to watch that you're just like, I don't want to see this, I don't want to see it. It's completely oversaturated.
Yeah,
Um, so it's really about, at this point, it's sort of people are just trying to maximize profits. Um,
yeah,
so the the time it takes to create something of quality, can
yeah,
get expensive. And, it's all about let's make as much money as we can off of this, whether it's a feature film or even just
yeah,
content, like people like you are putting time into creating content that you actually
yeah,
are passionate about and have put work into. Whereas most people are like, well, I want to just try to create as much as I can. I want to see what goes viral. I
yeah,
want to see what hits. Um, and it's like the Gary V strategy of just be
yeah,
making content constantly and just creating digital noise everywhere. And it's overwhelming,
yeah.
psychologically, but it's hard to weed through, um, so yeah,
So
it's tough. It's
yeah,
I think for people who really want to create stories and create cinema,
yeah,
it's great. But it seems like the majority of the people out there are creating content, hopefully with the goal of going viral, making money as quickly as possible,
yeah,
and getting out. And it's sort of devaluing the art form to a certain degree.
yeah. And I personally I hate that because there's an artist out there who actually put his time into doing his craft and created his film, and his film just gets shrouded by all of this noise.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel
And
like that happens quite a lot these days, and you're competing with the algorithm at this point.
yeah,
It's an interest based algorithm, so
yeah,
it's going to give you what it thinks that you're interested in, and
yeah,
it's not always accurate. I mean, if you
yeah,
if you're on social media and you click on one thing out of curiosity, now the algorithm's like, oh, they like this, and it'll start giving
yeah,
you more and more of that, and you're like, how do I get rid of it? And it's now you're getting bombarded with it, um, versus actually going to a store, like a record
yeah,
store or whatever, and going through and being like, oh, I like this. This is what I want,
yeah.
and and it has value to you, and you cherish it. Just you're getting bombarded and confused. And at a certain point, people are like, I don't even know what I like anymore.
People think they have the freedom of choice, but with this algorithm, basically removes all of the power of choosing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you think they're just instead of people who become famous because of doing something meaningful, most of the people that get famous right now are just famous because they get lucky?
Yeah. The algorithm chooses them, I guess, and just starts pumping it out because it thinks that, oh, this has value. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, they do get lucky. I mean, it happens every day. Yeah. I, and I think there's a now too that is the goal as
yeah,
opposed to the goal being, at least for me personally, the goal
yeah,
is the process of creating. Like I said before,
yeah,
once it's done, I kind of am like, okay, cool, that was great. Let's move on to the next process. I love the act of creating. My goal is never like fame or
yeah,
profit, even though filmmaking is expensive, so you do have to think about that to a certain degree.
yeah,
Um, but now people are kind of like, well, I want to have the lowest amount of effort with the highest reward. And
yeah,
so the goal becomes, I want to go viral. I want to be famous, um, but I don't want to work as hard as, I don't want to work for 15 years to create something,
yeah.
um, yeah.
Trends nowadays keeps changing almost every single day. I mean, to the point that what's famous yesterday is not famous today. Do you think that the fact that trends and interests change that fast affects the time period of your ability to create a film? Because maybe you think, this idea would be interesting for people, and then after you've finished filming it, it's not in an interest anymore.
Me personally, or just people in general?
Uh, you personally,
Um, I mean, for me, I try not to think of too much about how it's going to be received. Um, I focus on that feeling that I mentioned before about, is this the idea that really pulls me? Because if all you're doing is creating based on how the audience is going to perceive it, and if it's going to go viral, and if it's going to become marketable, then the work is going to suffer. If you are able to live within the moment in the creative process, then everything works out. Even if nobody sees it, then you were enjoying your life while you made this thing. Um, so, yeah, personally, obviously I want to do this for the rest of my life, and I am aware that I need financing and I need to eat. So you hope that enough people see it to where you get to make something else. But I mean, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So if nobody sees my work for my entire life, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop making work.
There's something special about just doing something because you enjoy it.
Yeah, like I said,
And
I used to skateboard. I was obsessed with becoming a
yeah,
professional and getting in magazines when I was younger. Um,
yeah,
and at a certain age, you're like, okay, that's not happening. I'm gonna,
yeah,
I can't do it. But I still skateboard multiple times a week
yeah.
because I just love skateboarding. I have no desire
That's
to
amazing.
be famous or be a pro or be in all the magazines. Doesn't interest me at all. I just love skateboarding, and it's the same with filmmaking.
It's amazing, and a lot of people will never have what you have because you actually do like doing something. Because a lot of people doesn't even have hobbies anymore.
Right? Yeah, unfortunately. Um, but I mean, most people are trying to survive at this point, which
Yeah,
is tough. I'm very fortunate that I'm enabled to make a living with
yeah,
filmmaking and production work. But yeah, if I wasn't, I would also be probably not work creating as much as I can, because I it's such a difficult thing to just get a roof and food at this point.
yeah.
So,
By the way, did you start immediately with Spillsheet Media, or did you work with a studio beforehand?
um, I mean, I've freelanced for many years, but yeah, I've had Skillsheet for a while. But I've never worked with a studio. I've just kind of done my own thing. But the way production works, you work with multiple production companies at one time on commercials or films or whatever. Um, so yeah, I've never been in the studio system. Uh, I don't really have much desire to be accepted into the studio system or into Hollywood. I guess I'm just kind of uh, forever going to be an indie filmmaker. Um, but I do work on commercials, and there's good money in commercials, even though I have moral reservations about that. But you know, you have to eat. It's tough. It's tough to make a living. So
Yeah, but when some people work on studios, a lot of the things that they want to do, they can't do anymore because there's these sponsors. Maybe they don't like it. There's this director maybe doesn't like it like that, and I think it's very limiting on who you are personally.
yeah, I think if you want creative freedom, then lower your budget. If you and I'm a firm believer of creativity within limitations. If you have self-imposed limitations, you're like, okay, well, I only can shoot this entire thing in one location because that's all I can afford. Then come up with creative ideas that make that one location interesting. Um, so that's where the studio system and the big budget films don't really interest me, because for me, the process of creating things is the most interesting thing, and I don't want people saying, well, we're paying for it, so we get to tell you what the creative is going to be, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. For me, creative freedom is more important than a big paycheck.
Yeah, it's like basically selling your soul.
Essentially, yeah. And some people are okay with that. They like the fame, they like the paycheck. But for me, it's the process of making the story, and that's really the only thing I care about.
That's amazing. That's really a lot of people should be like you.
It's not easy. So I don't suggest it.
Uh, and by the way, what are the biggest challenges that you're currently facing, especially because you're an independent filmmaker?
Um, Getting people to show up, getting people who talk a lot about doing things to actually do the things that they say they're going to do. Um, I mean, but that's been a constant challenge for as long as I can remember. Most people talk more than they do, and you have it's tough to differentiate. Like, is this person actually going to do it, or are they just talkers? And there's only one way to find out is just see how far along they go. But yeah, it's tough. It's a tough thing to trust new people to come in. I've been fortunate enough to work with people who think like I do and are always constantly creating, but it's few and far between.
Do you think the important part of people working with you is the fact that they think like you?
Uh, yeah, um, I mean, at this point, it's very important to be surrounded by people that you can trust and who have similar goals as you do, and similar work ethics as well. Uh, I mean, I'm at a point where I just don't have patience anymore for people who don't have a work ethic, don't have a discipline. Um, I try not to be cruel or cold about it, but you know, I'm I work a lot and I move fast, and I get very frustrated and stressed out when I feel stifled by people who I'm relying on, but then they don't come through.
Yeah, I think the hard part of finding someone is finding someone who is good at his job and also can do that thing for a very long time.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. Is it hard to find those kind of people nowadays?
I believe so. I think there
Yeah,
is a certain level of entitlement.
yeah,
People have talent, and they think that talent is enough to
yeah,
just be handed the opportunities. But I mean, I would rather work with people who have little talent but have extreme work ethic and discipline, because they will get good, um, versus people who have a lot of talent but don't really do it that often and just kind of
yeah,
sit around complaining and thinking that it's going to be handed to them. Um, yeah, you gotta put in the work. Um, Otherwise, nothing's going to come out of it.
yeah. Plus, those people who are talented but isn't willing to do the work, they won't improve far beyond their capabilities right now.
Yeah, I've seen it plenty of times where I'm like, okay, you seem to be have plateaued, for
Yeah,
years. It's like you're good, but it never changes, it never develops.
yeah,
I think people have a very difficult time, and this could just be the state of our culture at this point. But people have a very difficult time stepping out of their comfort zone, and
yeah,
I don't think any real growth happens within a comfort zone. You have to be constantly putting yourself in these uncomfortable situations, putting yourself into situations where you don't know exactly what you're doing, and then you figure it out and
yeah,
you learn, and that's sort of just the cycle that you continue along. And I think a lot of people don't want to be uncomfortable.
yeah.
I mean, I,
And also,
I think it's ingrained in our DNA. Being uncomfortable
yeah,
it's a survival technique, but um, if you want something, amazing out of life, you want to create something, then you're going to have to go against your programming and be uncomfortable for a while.
do you think most of the cause with this is the very short attention span that people have now?
I think so. I think people get distracted very easily. And I think that if there's even a little bit of obstacle, people just go, nope, I'm gonna go to that one. But overcoming that obstacle is what makes it interesting. Um, So instead of like going forward, pushing through the obstacle, problem solving, getting to another obstacle, solving that problem, people will just say, okay, well, that didn't work out. I'm gonna try this new thing. Because when you start a new thing, it's always very exciting. That feeling of like, oh, this I have this idea. I'm gonna, you know, a week in, it's not as fun anymore. Problems start to come up, and you lose that initial spark. So I think that's where the discipline comes in. So you have to, you know, keep doing it even though that spark may be gone, um, and then it comes back eventually, hopefully. But yeah, I think the short attention span and like I said, the inability to sit in an uncomfortable situation is what causes a lot of people to just give up or start a project, move on to another project without finishing that old project, and just do that cycle their entire life, and then have tons of unfinished projects.
And I think they don't realize the fact that if you go to another project, it's like going to level one again.
Yeah, like he's starting over. Like, um, yeah, I think that's very common in our society at this point. Um, it filters into all walks of life. You know, jobs, dating, everything. People are like, oh, it wasn't exciting anymore. I'm going on to the next thing.
I think it's far easier to be good or at least great in your industry nowadays, or in any industry nowadays, because a lot of people are not working to be good.
I haven't thought about it, but you're probably right. Yeah, yeah, maybe that will help me in the long run.
Yeah. And by the way, can you talk about the We Should Game featured film?
Yeah, sure. So the We Should game started sort of as a joke in 2003 when I was living in New York. My friend and I posted a Craigslist ad saying that we were brother and sister producers looking to start a pornography company, and we were looking for models to act on film. It literally was a joke, and that's why it's called the We Should game. It's like we should post a Craigslist ad as a joke to see what kind of weirdos we get. And we got a response from a documentary filmmaker who said he wanted to make a film about us. So for 6 months, he shot footage of us while we failed at making a pornography company. Um, and then the whole thing just sort of dissolved, and that was the footage that sat idle for 15 years until I got it, and started writing a screenplay based on this footage. So now what the We Should game has become is it's about uh, a man that becomes the subject of a documentary when he tries to start a Christian rock band following the failure of his pornography company. Um, so it's a mix between mockumentary, documentary, and a scripted narrative, uh, 90 minutes long. So yeah, there's Christian music that we wrote and recorded and played. So you can actually buy the CD on the website, theweshouldgame.com. Uh, we're screening on the 24th of this month, July, at Four Star Theater in San Francisco. So I'll be there doing a Q&A. So this is good practice for actually answering questions on stage.
And also, by the way, I saw that it is gonna be streaming on some platforms.
Yeah, I'm getting it up on some streaming platforms right now. I actually just got the closed captioning done last night, so I'm gonna put that up soon. Um, so probably all the standard ones, say Amazon, Tubi, things like that.
Awesome. I'm gonna try and look for it
Yeah.
once it's released. And by the way, how do you balance between your artistic goals and the budget of the film? Sometimes it's limiting.
Uh, yeah, it's very limiting. And that does determine my style a little bit. I kind of just lean into sort of, I guess, lower budget aesthetic. Uh, that's one of the reasons why the We Should game was sort of a documentary as well, because it's much cheaper to just have your friend follow you around with a camera. Even though there was money set aside for the narrative section of the film where we lit it, and I had a crew and actual locations and actors. But like with the short film that you mentioned earlier, the lake with the astronaut, I built the set out of cardboard, um, and just leaned into it and said, "This is the aesthetic of the film," because I don't have enough money to build a space station that looks like a real space station, or rent a location that has that, um, which oftentimes creates a very interesting type of film, because the subject matter for that film was very intense. And fortunately I worked with a very talented actor named Lisa Weeklam, who can really go to the depths of dark emotions. So I had her in this state of extreme loneliness, strapped on Mars, but you look around and it looks like a child's toy. The space station looks very childlike, even though the subject matter. So there's this interesting dichotomy going on there. So yeah, like it's budget limitations sometimes can create a lot of creativity, and you just have to accept that, and uh, not be like, oh, it has to be this, but I can't afford it. So, but there's different ways to approach it. I think some people would be like, well, it has to be this. Let's find the money. Um, and that's a skill that I'm still learning. I always just end up doing it easier for me. But hopefully, I will be able to have a budget at some point to do much larger things.
Yeah, but if you think about it, if when you have the budget for the bigger films, you'll be much better in managing them and making better results with just those money.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's I saw something, an interview with Wes Anderson, and he talked about that.
Yeah,
Like a lot of the stuff that he does using models for trains and things like that. If they were trying to actually shoot it on a real train, or like with um, build a hotel, versus like shoot in an actual hotel. It creates a certain style that is very Wes
yeah,
Anderson, but he keeps the budget low. you know, that's kind of where I learned to embrace that idea. Just, let's lean into this low budget. How can we do this for cheap, um,
yeah,
and have it be unique? That's another thing. Is a lot of these big budget films, they all look identical,
yeah,
and they're spending multiple millions of dollars, and you're like, there's nothing really unique about it. Like sometimes the story
yeah,
is interesting, but you know, the sets, locations, the shooting are all the same. You gotta rent a techno crane and fly over the top of something. And like, well, how can you do that
yeah,
for very cheap and in a very interesting
yeah.
and unique way?
And I noticed with these very big films, you never fell in love with the setting of the film because it changes like every minute.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I think sometimes they're just throwing money out the window. Like, um, and I think there's a difference between the sort of indie filmmaker or auteur approach, where the filmmakers uh, thumbprint is on the film, and you watch it and you're like, yes, that is so and so. That's a Wes Anderson film. That's a Yorgos Lanthimos film. Like you just know it by looking at it. Versus a studio film where there's not really any one person who's putting their feel on it. It's trying to make it as marketable as possible. Um, they're going to want to make sure that people don't get up and walk out. So there's going to be a lot of quick edits and fast paced action or dialogue. So yeah, they start looking the same because there's so many people creating, um, and it's just a machine pumping stuff out for profit. And they're
yeah. It's
they're
hard.
distraction. They're good. I mean, I sometimes watch them when I'm like, I need to just not think about stuff for a little
Yeah,
while, and that's what they're good for. It's simply distraction. They're not elevating your life in any way. They're not
yeah.
teaching you any real lessons and helping you become a better person. They're just a distraction from your life.
They're trying to substitute the soul of the film with fast transitions.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if you think about it, the attention span that people have today, they probably, even if they have a great story, people will not get it as much as if they would watch it a few years back.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I definitely
Yeah,
think um, people are going to start having a difficult time engaging in stories that might not be
yeah,
rapid fire.
yeah,
I recently learned about a concept that a lot of these studios are implementing called two screen, which they're trying to make screenplays accessible enough to the
yeah.
audience while they're on their phone. So they want to make
Oh,
basically because they know that people are going to be watching Netflix or whatever while they're on their phone. So if they write a script, they're like, it needs to be more two screen because people
yeah,
need to be able to understand what's happening in the film while they're looking on Instagram simultaneously because they're just biting for attention. Um,
yeah,
Whereas, some films, if you're on your phone, you're going to miss what the hell's going on.
yeah,
But they expect that people are going to be on their phones at this point. Um, so yeah, the quality of the screenwriting is being forced to be simplified
yeah.
um, because people are only half paying attention.
What does two screen mean? So basically, instead of just having this amazing movie, they try to make it so that even if you're not watching, it's like the movie is being narrated to you in some kind of way.
Yeah, you can sort of pay attention to the story and get the story by only half paying attention
Yeah,
because it's such a simplified story, or it's using a story structure that is so familiar that you'd know that
yeah,
in 10 minutes, these two people are going to meet. In 20 minutes,
yeah,
it's going to happen. It's just this regurgitated story structure that people subconsciously have already seen so many times. I mean, there's
yeah,
the superhero movies follow the hero's journey. You kind of just know what's going to happen beat by beat within
yeah,
within the story, and if anything changes or goes
yeah,
off of that structure, um, it's going to feel weird. People are like, "That's not how superhero movies
yeah,
go." Um, yeah, and it's been done so much now that people, whether they know it or not, I believe that it's subconsciously they're like, okay, by a half an hour, that's the mid, that's the beginning of the second
yeah.
act. Like that's when all the setup
It's
stuff is done, and they're like, okay, cool, now we
yeah.
can engage in the story. Um,
They're trying to make it as simple as possible for anyone who's watching, or as predictable.
yeah, that's predictable.
Yeah, but yeah, I think they're gonna be producing very outdated concepts of films that just reuse the same concept and just different character names.
Yeah, I mean they've been doing that for years. I think it's gonna keep
Yeah.
getting worse.
Do you think they would realize that we should maybe do something new?
Um, I mean, at this point, Hollywood and the studio system, I don't think that they're really concerned with making art. They're concerned with making
Yeah.
profit.
Yeah.
And if people start not enjoying those films
Yeah.
and watching them and buying the merch that comes out after it, then they might change their system because they're only concerned about profit.
Yeah.
If the audiences move on, that affects their profit margin, and they will think of something else, a different way to
Yeah.
get people's attention and get people's money. Um, yeah, they're essentially big commercials at this point. I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say that there's some stuff that comes out that little rare gems here and there, but um, for the most part, I think
Yeah.
it's all mainstream. Um,
What advice would you give to some aspiring filmmakers who wants to enter this industry?
um, I guess well, it depends on what they want.
Yeah.
If you want to be in the studio system and you want to be a director for hire, I can't
Yeah.
necessarily give advice on that because I've never had any real desire to do that, and I've never tried to break in at that level. Um,
Yeah.
but if you want to create stories in cinema, then you just have to create stories in cinema. And going back to what you said before about the access to the technology,
Yeah.
that is one of the benefits now of of the state of technology
Yeah.
is anybody can shoot something on their phone. So I would say focus on screenwriting and make
Yeah.
learning how to craft good stories, because you can have a poorly shot film that has an amazing story and people will be engaged with it. But if you have a poor story and a beautifully lit and shot film, then maybe that's how you get into Hollywood. I don't know, because that seems to be what they do.
And that's amazing. And if you can talk with your younger self, maybe go into the past and give yourself some advice, what would that be?
I probably wouldn't do that because every mistake I've made has led me to this point. Yeah, I don't know. I would just say, keep doing what you're doing.
What is your five most favorite films?
uh, that's probably one of the tougher questions to ask somebody who makes films. Uh, Clockwork Orange would be up there. I usually go more on directors, but because they have so many different films. But yeah, Clockwork Orange and a lot of Kubrick stuff. Dogtooth is still a big one for me. Yorgos Lanthimos' first film, I think. Uh, Breaking the Waves, the Lars Van Trier was a big influence on me. Um, Idiocracy was pretty profound. It's basically watching us right now. Uh, what else? I mean, Apocalypse Now is always up there. Um, that one just because of the sheer adventure that it took to make that film. I mean, the film itself is brilliant, but just imagining what it would have been like to be in that on that set. Um, so yeah, those are the ones that popped into my head. I mean, there's hundreds, and it also depends on the mood I'm in as well. Those are all very intense ones. Well, well, I guess Idiocracy was pretty intense too because it was sort of a foreshadowing of what society was about to become. But yeah, Miyazaki films are big. I've been kind of rewatching a lot of those. Uh, Howl's Moving Castle just rewatched. It's brilliant.
What about directors? Since you said you are a fan of a lot of directors.
Yeah, like I said, Miyazaki, Yorgos Lanthimos, Lars Van Trier. Uh, I mean, Wes Anderson is a big influence. Kubrick has always been one of my heroes. Uh, yeah, I like subversive directors. I like people who try new things, um, even if it might make people uncomfortable or angry.
That's great. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, what are some upcoming projects that you have?
I am working on a new screenplay.
Yeah.
I can't really talk too much about, but yeah, just writing, trying to just be making short films because I'm a firm
Yeah.
believer that the best way to get good at something is just to be doing it all the time. It's sort of the 10,000
Yeah.
hour rule.
Yeah.
Um, I have a graphic novel that I wrote and is currently being illustrated. So I'm going to
Yeah.
hopefully put that out at the end of the month and sell books, but
Yeah.
use that as a vehicle to try to get funding to make the film because it's
Yeah.
more of a sci-fi post pre-apocalyptic kind of thing and would require funding. I can't just shoot that one
Oh man,
with
that's
card.
gonna cost a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I could make cardboard sets for it, but I feel like I've already done that. So um, this one, I would like some money.
Yeah, you're gonna have to use a lot of cardboards.
It's a lot of cardboard. Yeah.
That's amazing. And where can our listeners find you?
Well, I'm on Instagram. at underscore Spillsheet. Spillsheet.com is my website. You can check out some of the short films on YouTube. It's just at
Yeah.
Spillsheet on YouTube. Um, and yeah, you can contact me through any of those platforms.
Amazing. Do you have any last message to anyone who might be listening?
Um, yeah, I mean, just keep creating, making stuff. It's one of the best gifts that we've been given is the ability to create. Um,
Yeah.
so if you have that desire and that
Yeah.
skill and that talent, then don't waste it because we're only here for
Yeah.
a short amount of time. So don't be one of those people who have talent but don't do anything.
And I think a lot of aspiring filmmakers are gonna lean towards less thinking but more chat GPT give me ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any tool that has come
Yeah.
before. I know there's a big pushback from AI using AI in art, and I
Yeah.
feel it as well.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's very similar to when synthesizers came around, people were like,
Yeah.
oh, classical music is ruined, it's just
Yeah.
gonna replace, and it's like it didn't. It just added a new type of musical genre. Same
Yeah.
with video cameras when they came out, or like film is dead, and to a certain degree that is somewhat true. People still shoot on film, but it created a new thing, and now this AI is definitely different than those
Yeah.
things. I wouldn't necessarily put them in the same category, but like I've used ChatGPT for story prompts. It
Yeah.
I feel fortunate in my process that I like to explore when I
Yeah.
create. I don't just think, okay, this is the thing, make the thing. It's a very organic process.
Yeah.
Um, so I like putting information into AI and seeing what it spits out, and then
Yeah.
cutting that up,
Yeah.
using paste, putting it back into the air, and just regurgitating, seeing what happens, and then seeing how I am inspired by those prompts. So it's like you can prompt ChatGPT, but then ChatGPT prompts you. I
Yeah.
would never use it to, you know, do the actual creation, um,
Yeah.
but I think that it's a good way to break open ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think there is a problem, obviously, with copyright and
Yeah.
having to use other people's work to create stuff. I'm hoping that will somewhat come to an
Yeah.
end, and people will figure out how to make that no longer existing. But yeah, if you want to use AI to make your entire thing, then again it falls back to maximizing profit. It's like, are you really making art from your personal process of creating art, or are you literally just trying to make as much money as you possibly can? Because I feel like that's how a lot of people are trying to use AI right now, is like, oh, it's going to cut down on my expenses. And that's true. And I've experienced that firsthand. But so just to give an example of where I'm at with, so the graphic novel that I'm working on right now, the illustrator is using a combination of hand drawn illustrations that she's then teaching the AI with prompts, and then using Photoshop to piece it all together. So it's now it's just basically incorporating the AI into the process of creation, and it's creating some very unique images. Um, but I mean, when I see just AI generated images where it's like I just prompt something and the AI made it, if I don't feel anything, there's no real visceral reaction other than like, okay, I mean, an AI made that. You thought of a prompt and you did that, versus taking what it creates, chopping it up, reimagining it, you know, combining skills that you already have with skills that the AI has. That to me is interesting. Um, the integration of human and robot, I guess, is more what that would be. Um, but it's happening. It's I unless there's a huge revolution and people are like, down with the robot and they're starting a civil war against it, which I don't see happening. It's just going to be a part of our lives, and so a lot of people get very upset and voice their negative opinions on social media because that's healthy. Uh, but yeah, it's here. So I guess just figure out like how you can incorporate it into your work um, without hurting others and ruining society.
I think AI, instead of what people think oppressing humans if they get smart enough to do it, I think they're just gonna do it by killing us with comfort.
Yeah,
They got us
we're
all
already there.
fat and just
We're already there. um,
And by the way, it's amazing what you do with your creative process, basically integrating AI with it instead of some people are lazy and just doing, hey, write me this movie script and just use it.
yeah, um, it can create some interesting stuff, but if you just leave
Yeah,
it at if that's your end,
yeah,
like what, I don't know, just why bother? Like
yeah,
it can raise an interesting thing, and you're like, okay, well that one piece is actually kind of cool, and I'm gonna then write
yeah.
off of that. I mean, it's
There's,
similar. Like I don't know. I remember reading that William S. Burroughs would like cut up
yeah,
newspapers and then rearrange the cuttings to make
yeah,
new poetry and stuff like that. And it's like if you kind of approach it from that angle, it can be very interesting. You're like,
yeah,
well, you put something in, it spits something out, and then you can cut it up. You can William S. Burroughs
yeah,
it and cut it up and make something completely new that you might have not been able to get to that point without the AI in between.
yeah.
But you can't
There's
stop
something
there.
powerful. There's something powerful with the human brain.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
amazing.
Yeah,
And by the way, it's a great honor to talk with you. Thank you
yeah. It
for
was
joining me on
great
this
talking to you,
podcast.
man. Thank you so much.
And again, if anyone wants to find Kian, I'm gonna have all the social media links up here. And again, it has been a pleasure, and I hope you have a more fantastic career and that you have a bigger budget for your films because I know you're gonna use every penny of those to do something amazing.
Thank you, John.
And I just end. That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.